team has legitimately received a good deal of credit for staving off the worst fears, a 1930s style financial meltdown, which did seem like a genuine possibility early last year. Geithner continued the Bush administration's ambitious bailouts, and that did stabilize the financial system. And certainly things are much better today than they were a year ago. Now, academic economists and pundits will continue to debate the way in which the $787 billion stimulus spending package was put together and distributed, but it clearly took some sting out of elevated rates of joblessness. Things would be worse had we not had the stimulus. That seems almost inarguable. And what has become clear is that for most American workers, the economy actually has snapped back faster than in the last two recessions, though for the 6 million people who have been out of work officially for 6 months or longer, this remains the worst job market since the Great Depression. It's as if they have really been kicked out of the economy. When we survey the way the Obama team has gone about addressing the crisis, it seems clear that they've concluded that the only real policy imperative was to restore a basic sense of order and preclude the possibility of the slide into the abyss, if you will. And after that, the policy has tended to be lightweight, internally conflicted, and motivated more by kind of muddling through and waiting for growth to kick in than an attempt at fundamental change. This has proven to be problematic, not only in terms of the politics. I mean, we know about the populist outrage that's out there, that sense that they've only fixed up the banks, what about ordinary people? But also in terms of the consequences for the real economy. Take, for example, the administration's much touted initiative to slow the pace of home foreclosures, which continues to be an area of real concern. The administration devoted $75 billion to this program and promised it would help 3 to 4 million households hang on to their homes by the end of next year. Well, as of last month, only about 1 million people had even gotten mortgage payments lowered on a so-called trial basis, 3 months of lowered payments. And only about a third of those people, so about 300,000, had seen those arrangements made permanent. The foreclosure wave continues, largely unabated, and there are now fresh worries about a new fall in housing prices. There's even an argument that the foreclosure plan has made things worse for a lot of the people who've participated. There's been false hope that you could really get an affordable deal on your mortgage, and people have made payments on a trial basis only to lose their homes to foreclosure a few months later, as if the only point of this plan is to slow down the pace. So again, you muddle through and you hope that confidence is restored and somehow we just grow our way out of the problem. I talk to people all the time now who say, I'm making 3 months of payments on a lowered mortgage plan in the hopes that I'm going to be able to hang on to my home, and then I can't anyway. I could have kept the 3 months of payment, rented a place, or used the money to move to a place, to put down money for a security deposit for first and last month's rent. Now I'm stuck. I've given the bank the money. I still don't have my house. Now they're foreclosing anyway, and I'm back at square one. The real issue is that too many mortgages are underwater, meaning the value of the mortgage, what is owed to the bank, is more than the house is actually worth. And most experts from across the political spectrum have come around to the view that we have to write down the value of mortgages. But that involves a loss for somebody. Either the taxpayer is going to have to cover the losses for the banks, or the banks are going to have to swallow a loss. And to date, Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, has resisted calls to do this. He's been worried that if we write down the value of mortgages, that'll hurt the banks again, and we might risk another crisis. And there's also the concern that it's just not fair. That what about the person who's been paying their mortgage for all these years, and now their neighbor who stopped paying their mortgage gets a better deal while they have to continue to make the payments as usual. Well, this increasingly looks like bad politics, this failure of the anti-foreclosure program, and particularly in the wake of the Massachusetts Senate race, which we all know about. What seems abundantly clear is that if you're going to spend $700 billion of taxpayer money to bail out large financial institutions, the public is going to demand, a sense of accountability. They're going to demand, the phrase I like to use is a perp walk. They want to see that somebody's paying a penalty for leading us into this crisis. And the public is also going to want to see that it is getting some direct benefits from the bailout. Not only sensible regulations to minimize the possibility of another crisis, but a more ambitious effort to generate jobs and more aid for troubled homeowners. Well, politics aside, the administration's calculations, both in the modesty of its anti-foreclosure initiative and in the saving of financial regulatory reforms for late in the game, reflects a sense that staving off immediate crisis and watering down its effects is the only real policy imperative. That's the only thing they were ever truly aiming at. Get us out of the crisis and hope that the rest will take care of itself. If that calculation proves wrong, it's going to be much more than a political misfire. It could have severe economic consequences for millions of working people, or wannabe working people, for many years to come. If there's one clear takeaway from our crisis, it's that we have to reorient our economy away from financial engineering, away from dreaming up ways to make money move around and somehow calling that economic progress, and we have to get back to generating goods and services of intrinsic value. We have to generate quality jobs in the millions so that we can essentially transition from living on home equity lines of credit and credit cards to living on paychecks. And this is another key point I really want to leave you with in terms of how you absorb economic news. We have to come to grips with the reality that our economic crisis was, at the household level, much more the product of need than greed. And by that I mean there's this misleading narrative, and frankly this was one of the key motivations in my decision to write my book, this idea that the crisis was the result of people living beyond their means. Too many of us got greedy. We filled our garages with cars we couldn't really afford, the garages themselves we couldn't afford, and now we're going through a kind of comeuppance for our gluttonous consumption, and that comeuppance is healthy. Well, extravagance obviously did play some role in our crisis, and we all know people who lived extravagantly beyond their means and got themselves into trouble. But in the main, a lot of people lived beyond their means for the simple reason that their means were inadequate. They couldn't keep up with the rising costs of healthcare and housing and education, while paychecks got harder and harder to secure, particularly for lesser skilled people, and wages stagnated. Let me give you some data. Don't take my word for it. In 1973, the average rank and file American worker, which is to say about 80% of the American workforce, brought home about $330 a week. That's in 1982 dollars for the economists in the room. Well, even as the economy grew in the years that followed, the typical weekly paycheck dipped to $260 in 1996. And by October 2008, those same weekly earnings had inched up to only $279, which was roughly the same level as in 1983. In other words, a quarter century had come and gone with the average working American stuck in place. One of the major characters in my book, and a woman who really brought this home for me, the degree to which the economic system had just simply broken down for many working people, is a woman named Dorothy Thomas, who got herself into trouble by living in better neighborhoods than she could really afford in order to send her two daughters to better schools. Dorothy is an African-American woman who had grown up poor in rural Oklahoma. She had been sent to one of the first forcibly integrated school districts in the state. She hadn't made it to college, but she was really insistent that her daughters would make it to college. And so, as she put it to me, I truly bought into the idea that education is the way out of poverty. It just seemed like basic common sense that the nicer areas would have better schools. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if your kids are going to school with kids who are pre-programmed to go to college, that's what they will expect. She succeeded, and her oldest daughter actually got a master's in education and is now a public school teacher in Hawaii. And